Hello and welcome to another episode of Undercurrent. My name is Christy Mulligar and it's so lovely to have your company again this evening once again. Well, first up on tonight's show, recently there was a rally against the closing of our Indigenous communities and Lucy Nicol went along.
The federal government has announced it will be ending federal funding for essential services in remote Indigenous communities from June of this year.
But Mr Speaker, it is not realistic, and those communities, 273 of them, are not sustainable into the future.
Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Today, as a Western Australian, I'm proud to say that Perth turned out in its thousands to send a very big, loud and strong message to the Prime Minister and Premier Barnett that homeland communities must not be closed. And West Australians were joined by many other thousands of Australians across this country who also rallied protesting the closure of WA homeland communities.
Indigenous activist and lawyer Tammy Solneck of Amnesty International pointed out in her speech on the day that under the native title laws imposed upon them, they must show a continuous connection to the land to prove their title. If they are forced off their homelands, it will be much harder to secure native title.
I believe very strongly that we have got to stop telling Aboriginal people where they can live and what they have to do. This will be, for many of these communities, the third time that they have been forced off their land. It is just completely and utterly unacceptable.
The problem is that there hasn't been any engagement with Aboriginal people. I've been to the Kimberley twice since Mr Barnett announced his desires, and not one community has been spoken to. The Shires are in a position where they're probably happy to take on the responsibility for those services as we get here in Perth, but aren't funded to do so. And I don't accept for a minute that closing remote communities will result in any savings.
You know, communities are essence for our peoples. A lot of the community exist on lands where our people have been for thousands of years. Our communities really want to function and look after their families and family structures within their or close to their homeland. I think that's very important.
As a practical matter, it simply doesn't make sense to close them down. Where will people go? They'll go into the fringes of towns like Fitzroy Crossing and Halls Creek. They'll go into other communities that have already got their challenges. There are problems. We all know that there's problems. There's issues that we've got to work through. But we have got to empower Aboriginal people to take charge of their own destiny. We have got to stop thinking that we can just order them around and that somehow or other this is going to solve these problems that we've been living with really for the last couple of 100 years.
If people choose to live where there's no jobs, obviously it's very, very difficult to close the gap because
But are you
education...
penalising people for living in remote areas there? Isn't that something you should encourage to get people out of the cities?
It's not the job of the taxpayer to subsidise lifestyle choices.
This is not a lifestyle choice. This is a cultural identity and one that, quite frankly, we have got to value. I mean, around the world people value the fact that we have got such an ancient culture and such ancient spirituality still alive, but here in Australia, somehow or other, we are not valuing that.
As I look at that old railway station, I remember my dad being pulled over by the police when he jumped off the tram to see if he had a permit. It was after 6 o'clock and Dad happened to have that permit.
About what year was that?
That was about 1943, just after the war. My brother-in-law came back from the war and he died on the reserve, never got a house or land like white soldiers.
And yet he served his country?
He served his country and this was his country. And he came back and that's the way he was treated. He died just in a pauper's grave after fighting Japanese for a land that he was supposed to be his, but when he came back he was denied all rights.
The Aboriginal Heritage Act Amendment Bill 2014 is currently up for debate after it was introduced by the state government on the last day of Parliament last year.
The government will shortly be debating their proposed amendments to the Aboriginal Heritage Act. Now, the Aboriginal Heritage Act is old, passed in 1972, well before native title. And there was broad agreement, Aboriginal people, non-Aboriginal people, that the Act needed to be modernised. What we've seen introduced into the Parliament is Mr Barnett's view of modernisation means removing any involvement of Aboriginal people in that process, and I find that quite extraordinary in 2015.
Premier Barnett can't even give us a list of which communities he's talking about. He has got a committee that he has set up to look at homeland communities. You'd think in 2015 it might contain some leadership from Aboriginal groups, or indeed some Aboriginal people from those community homelands. But no, the committee is made up of bureaucrats within his department.
Mr Speaker, how many cases of gonorrhoea in the wider community? None. None, not a single case. And do you think I, as Premier, or the Health Minister as Deputy Premier, is going to sit by and let those children be abused? You are wrong. You are wrong, so wrong. Because we will not do that. We will not abandon those children.
I think combined with Mr Barnett's comments around remote communities, Mr Abbott's comments around remote communities, there is a real sense of Aboriginal people being bullied, under attack and incredibly disrespected by the state and federal governments. And I just hope we can bring government back from this approach that they're taking to Aboriginal people so that we can have a more rational conversation.
We do not support the forced closure of these communities. This is about this is the behaviour 200 years ago. We should have learnt by now that we have to empower Aboriginal people, not attempt to treat them like children and move them off their country and ignore the value of their cultural identity.
There is a tragic sense of irony around the fact that Mr Barnett goes around to Canberra saying we produce all the wealth of the nation, we deserve to get more of it back, now proposing for many of those Aboriginal communities that live right next to these mine sites, producing all this wealth, they are the first to feel the brunt when the finances are out of control. And I just think that is incredibly unfair. I think people see it for what it is, and I hope Mr Barnett can understand a sense of fairness and equity that this approach is not the right way.
Today, I want all these young people to know that we've got a voice, and we aim to use it through media, through all different areas and avenues. We've got good white people out there backing us up, and we're going to pull this government down, and we want sovereignty, and we want to give our own group therapy into what we can see is best for our people. We don't want the white fellow telling us what to do.
Write to the government, call the government members that you have, express your views and perhaps anger and frustration about the approach you're taking to Aboriginal policy and Aboriginal people, because ultimately politicians are all the same. We listen to people who call us and write to us and speak to us about issues that concern them. Please call your local Liberal member if you're in one of their electorates and let them know you expect a better process, a better approach, a fairer approach to Aboriginal people.
Lucy Nicol reporting for Undercurrent.
Well, next up, we take to the streets of Perth to find out your thoughts on this week, a very interesting topic that has caused much discussion. Should there be limits on what you're allowed to use your welfare payments for?
Welfare recipients across Australia could soon be given cashless debit cards. If the proposal is successful, those receiving financial assistance from the government will not be able to spend their money on products such as alcohol and cigarettes. A similar scheme is already in effect in areas of Perth, the Kimberley and Cape York. However, this operates on a voluntary basis only.
I hit the streets of Perth to find out what the public think about the government restricting welfare.
I think there should be some aspect of restrictions. Yeah, definitely.
Not unless they're really struggling to do the right thing and, buy healthy food before they buy other things. So.
Man, that's really bad, man. This country gonna be like America, man. We don't want that. We don't want government using like welfare cards to, to get people to go to Centrelink, to go to the bank. Nah, that's not good.
They still have a right, but if it's been given to them by the government or by, taxpayers' contributions, then really there should be some control over it.
Welfare is to support people so that they can get out and find a job. So in that regard, stopping them from spending that money on cigarettes and alcohol on paper seems like a pretty good idea because it's not what it's there for. It's there to help people out so they can find a job. But at the same time, really what's next? What, you tell people how they can spend their money? Where does that end? Sorry, you can't do this, sorry, you can't do that? It's a very tricky question and a very slippery slope.
No, I think they should have the liberties to do what they want with their own money. I don't think it should be taken away from them. It's just taking away their choices of what they can do. Everyone's individual and should be able to do what they want with their own money.
You could use it anywhere, you could purchase anything, but it would just have the restrictions on purchasing alcohol and gambling.
I guess it can be helpful in some situations, especially people that have addictions or like certain mental illnesses and look towards those sorts of things for comfort. But then it also restricts their basic needs and choice and their basic right of choice. So I don't know, it's kind of a double-edged sword.
If it's a welfare type thing, it's more helpful to be spending it on food because prices are quite expensive in Perth. So to help them with food and living expenses like housing and bills and that type of thing, but not on alcohol or cigarettes. It's too much of a luxury.
I would lean towards saying no. No, you shouldn't restrict people on what they spend their welfare on, but there should be some kind of evaluation process. If they have received welfare for up to 6 months and have nothing to show for it, no more welfare. But in the short term, we all like a drink, and some people, it's good to have a smoke and a beer on a Friday.
They shouldn't be restricted by a government. They should still, again, be able to make their own choices, whether they be good or bad.
I'm Jade Hawley, reporting for Undercurrent.
Well, I guess we'll see how this new trial goes. Time for a quick commercial break here on Undercurrent. See you again soon.